grew up in the countryside, right next to a national park frequently visited by nature lovers and bird enthusiasts. It was the kind of park where you're not really allowed to bike or ride horses, only walk or run, but 10-year-old me felt it was a stupid rule and did so anyway, because the trails were perfect for it. I knew full well that I wasn't supposed to do that, and I was caught a few times, but nothing much came of it, apart from a half-hearted "don't do it again." And I did, of course, until one day something frightening happened that made me stop. My family were horse breeders, and I would often take one of those horses for a ride, usually in the Forbidden Park. This day, very early in the morning, the first day of the summer holiday, it was beautiful outdoors, misty and foggy, yet a sky that promised a sunny day ahead. Since it was so early, before 6 o'clock, I knew there wouldn't be anyone on the trail to see me, so I let the horse set off at full speed along the trail. I only slowed down on the part of the trail that got steep on one side, leading down to the river, because the thought of one step too close to the edge was too much even for a kid with next to non-existent risk assessment skills. Suddenly, the horse came to a halt and refused to take another step. I grew up with horses all of my life, and I knew that usually indicates that you need to investigate. If there's something with the hooves, did the horse spot something that spooked it? The hooves were fine, but the horse didn't move an inch. That's when I saw it. Somebody had set up a trap, a thin, sharp metal wire across the trail, at perfect neck height for an adult. I stopped and looked around, but didn't see anyone. The wire was well attached to two trees and impossible for me to remove, so I led the horse around it, and to do so, I had to walk a bit up into the wooden area on the side of the trail. That's when I heard the singing. There is a song called Hey Tante Gubar, and it was that melody, but the lyrics were different and sung in a muffled voice. Today, I only remember parts of it, but translated it would have been something like, "Hey, all you runners, come here passing. Let the lifeblood pour out." I, as silently as I could, and with my heart in my throat, backed away, got up on the horse, and hurried back the way I came from as fast as I could. I knew I had to tell someone about it, but at the same time, I wanted to avoid admitting to riding a huge and very forbidden horse on those protected trails, so now I had a problem. The old stories about a mad old man living in a shed in the woods, a shed that was once a cottage for the local hunter, came back to me as I hung on the horse for my dear life. I got home and told my older brother about what happened, and he went back there with me in tow. We found the wire trap, and after a while of searching, we also found a spear-like pole on the ground, right on the spot where you'd land if you came running and jumped over the fallen tree on the trail. That's when we called the police. The area was searched, and several similar traps were found, but there was no sign of the old man. The following summer, though, there was big news in the local paper about spear-like poles being found right under the water surface, directly under that little tower you're supposed to dive from at the lake. And black garbage bags filled with big rocks were found on the narrow bridge crossing the river, so that if a car had hit it, the risk is it would have gone off the road and into the water. My dad told me about this incident that happened in the early 50s when he was a young child. I'm posting it as it was relayed to me. It was in the early 50s. My dad couldn't have been much older than 5 or 6 years old when it happened. He grew up on a large family farm that was fairly isolated. The nearest neighbor was at least a quarter-mile away through rolling wooded hills. There was no electric service on the farm back then, and they didn't get phones until the summer of 1984, so they were effectively on their own. One day, Grandpa had sent my uncle to the feed mill to collect payment for that year's harvest. He was told to get it in cash. Grandpa wanted to pay that year's taxes and then deposit the rest in the bank. My uncle brought the money home. That night around 2 a.m., they were awakened by a car parked on the property with its headlights aimed at the house. Grandpa rolled out of bed and crawled along the floor to my uncle and dad's bedroom and woke my uncle up. In almost complete darkness, they ran down the stairs. My uncle ran out the back door and Grandpa ran out the front. Grandpa threw the door open and ran outside so fast he pretty much leapt over the back steps and went to confront the guy. The driver of the car was already most of the way to the house. He saw Grandpa coming with my uncle close behind and he turned and hauled ass. Grandpa wasn't far behind. He made it to his car and he was trying to drive away, and Grandpa was grabbing the steering wheel, trying to stop him. He managed to break loose, and Grandpa chased him a short distance down the road, but he finally got away. At that point, Grandpa and my uncle noticed a second car at the end of the block speeding away. The intruders managed to get away that night. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. The next day, Grandpa and my uncle reported what had happened to the sheriff. The sheriff pretty succinctly told them to buy rifles. If it happens again, do what you have to do to defend yourself. The next stop they made was to the hardware store to buy rifles. One for each of my uncles and one for my grandpa. There was never a repeat of that incident, and as far as my dad knows, the late night visitors were never caught. That was at least 60 years ago. It was more than 30 years before I was born, and despite that, it has done more to form my views on self-reliance and home defense than any of the Supreme Court cases stating the police have no duty to protect individuals. It has done more to shape my views on self-defense than the 2 incidents in the past 5 years where I called 911 and received an automated "all operators are currently busy. Do not hang up" message. Life has taught me and my dad and grandfather that when things really do go sideways, you are essentially on your own for at least 15 minutes. Dad's recounting of the incident also showed that there's strength in numbers, whether it's the number of people responding to a threat, or in a more modern context, the number of rounds in a magazine, because you never really know what's going to happen, for better or worse. This is going to sound bizarre and made up, but I swear on my left nipple that this happened, and there are several witnesses. Even if I can't explain why somebody would do this, I'm fairly positive that this isn't anything paranormal. I live quite a distance off the road in an unremarkable house on private property. My neighbors are all older family members who go to bed extremely early and whose children are already grown and out of the house. In summary, there are no mischief makers to play pranks on us here. A few months ago, my mother and I stayed up late one evening watching television. Around 3 a.m., I turned the television off and decided to go to bed. As I was leaving the room, I began to hear what sounded like carnival music playing outside of my house, in the front yard. It was loud and close. My mother heard it too and immediately went to the window to investigate. She couldn't see anything but darkness. Everyone else was either asleep for the night or away on vacation. The lights were off at all their houses, and none of them would be caught dead listening to anything but country music anyway. We were miles from the nearest city, so it wasn't the product of noise pollution. You can hear when a car is pulled up in the yard, but there was no sound of a car. The silence where we live is usually deafening. All you can hear is the ringing in your ears. Where did this song come from? Who was playing it, and why? I was very unsettled by the idea of a stranger in our yard playing carnival music, as such suggests malicious intent. My father and uncle later mentioned that 20 years ago, when my parents moved in, the electrician had come to install a ceiling light and stopped in the middle of his work, saying he could hear Pink Floyd playing in the front yard. Neither my father nor my uncle could hear it. My father is a bit hard of hearing, and my uncle is much older, so they laughed it off and thought the man was insane, but the electrician was freaked out. He kept opening the door and trying to find the source of the noise, to no avail. Then it hit me. The song I had heard that night was Pink Floyd's Cirrus Minor, the part that sounds like carnival music. I played the song for my mother and she began freaking out, saying, Yes, that's what I heard." Who the hell sits in my yard at night at 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere playing the same song, which isn't even a popular song, 20 years later with no car? Where did they come from? They would have had to walk several miles to get here. Aside from this, the only other strange thing we experienced that would suggest an intruder, we feel and hear knocking on the living room window late at night around the same hour. Sometimes so intense that the entire wall of the house is rattled and it sends the couch against it into a reclining position. There are no nearby trees to trap the glass, and no animal except a human could possibly reach it. Fortunately, this has stopped over the last few weeks. Edit. This is an update on the situation, as many people have requested. Shortly after my first post, I had almost convinced myself our intruder was gone when, as I was staying up into the early hours of the morning to finish a bit of homework, I heard a noise in the yard just outside my bedroom. I sat there listening, but could only detect something like machinery. It was not a sound that I recognized. I couldn't imagine what was causing the noise unless the air conditioner was misbehaving, but once I had quieted down, I finished working and went to sleep. About 2 nights later, I heard loud grinding around the same hour, but again, could not determine the source. The following morning, my father discovered somebody had sabotaged our air conditioning unit by first removing a piece of its inner machinery and later throwing it into the fan while it was spinning, effectively destroying its blades and a few other pieces. The part had presumably been taken the first time I was disturbed by activity in the yard and thrown back in the second time. I had noticed it only because the outdoor unit is mounted against my bedroom. We thought initially that the piece, and forgive me for the ambiguous language as I'm not very technology savvy, had loosened by itself and broken down, but we called a repairman who begged to differ. He was surprised by the degree of damage and insisted he had never seen it happen naturally, suspecting somebody had removed several screws and tampered with the unit. He thought my father had attempted to work on it and caused the trouble, but of course he had not. A few days after the damaged parts had been fully replaced, my mother was leaving for a doctor's appointment when she began yelling and called the family into the yard. Our electric box was opened in the night and left ajar as if someone had been trying to find a wire to cut our electricity or disable a suspected indoor security system. We had been outside several times since the repairman finished the work, and we are certain he closed the electric box, if he ever even opened it. We have weathered several severe hurricanes here, and winds are not strong enough to open our electric box. A person had to have done it. Weeks passed without incident. My parents opting to overlook these concerning happenings. My father tried to explain the air conditioner as a freak occurrence. They purchased a new gun and did little else. Towards the beginning of summer, my grandfather mentioned that a couple weeks prior, when we were on vacation, he'd seen a red Jeep drive the lengthy distance from the road through our private property to our house in broad daylight. He didn't recognize the driver, but approached and questioned him. The man claimed he was looking for a woman that lived in a trailer. The person he claimed he was looking for had the name of a family friend that lives hours away from us. The man was behaving strangely, and my grandfather was not convinced by his story. He ordered him to leave immediately. Our family that lives around us on the farm is reinforcing their doors, installing extra locks, and keeping their children out of their yards until we find out what's going on. They won't even let them walk home from the bus stop anymore. I had stopped worrying over it as much because I've been preoccupied with moving to a new state, but the old knocking returned this evening at 10 p.m. My parents were watching TV together when they heard it. They turned on the porch light and peered out the peephole of the back door to investigate, but saw no one. At 3 a.m., I was awake watching TV when it sounded as if someone forcefully punched the glass of the usual exposed window. I covered it with a blanket, as I always do. An hour after I covered the window, I began to hear loud noises from our back door porch off of the kitchen, as if somebody had stepped onto it. However, it was short-lived. They apparently weren't walking around, but simply standing there. About 10 minutes after, I heard yet more knocking, except this time it wasn't on the exposed living room window, but further down the wall the window was on, next to the couch. It was 3 knocks, forceful enough to rattle the wall a bit, but not so much the couch moved. This is more alarming because it suggests the trespasser lingers here for several hours at a time, posing many questions. Are we being watched for an opportunity to force entry? Hasn't the opportunity already risen in the past, and they never took it? Are we being stalked? Do they gather here to drink and get high on the property and then decide in their stupor that it would be funny to antagonize us? Why is it only our house that is targeted and not the other houses on the farm? Why do they walk several miles to come here? Their behavior is escalating. Will they eventually take things further? I woke my mother and we sat awake together until the sun rose to keep watch. We compiled a list of happenings here that suggest our trespasser visits more frequently than they knock. Despite no one in the family smoking and anyone who does smoke living too far away for us to smell it, we often deal with the strong scent of a cigarette around windows or the front and back doors of the house. This happens at our bedroom windows with alarming regularity. Other times it's strange cologne or a chemical stench like a fresh perm. We of course remembered how my aunt's dogs will bark intensely at odd hours of the night, like they do when a stranger visits, and the motion detecting yard light has previously come on when no one is home at my grandfather's. My mother and I are going to walk around the perimeter of the house in the morning to look for cigarette butts, and we'll try convincing my father we at least need security cameras outside, even though I think we should involve the police at this point. He's been too indifferent to everything that has happened, and it makes it challenging to be proactive about our safety. Edit. Despite the insistence of myself and other Redditors, my parents never installed security cameras. My father remained resistant to the idea, most likely because he wasn't willing to admit that something was amiss. In the beginning, he complained about the cost, the possibility of hackers, and the difficulties with mounting a camera. He eventually promised to borrow someone's trail camera, but he never broached the subject with them. I moved to another state, and the need for the camera was no longer at the forefront of my mind, but when I remembered and received my new debit card, after some unfortunate identity theft, I offered to pay for one. I told my father that I would personally buy a camera or two and have them delivered. Only then did he confess that he was too afraid of seeing something spooky on it. He had the childlike idea that if he never saw anything happening, the problem would resolve itself. Despite all odds, the problem did resolve itself. Not long after I moved out, my grandfather, who lives in a separate house on the same farm, came home to find police cars in the driveway. An officer approached him and asked if he owned another house on the farm, as he needed to speak to the landlord about his tenants. The house in question is occupied by a late relative's widow who has a lifetime estate. My grandfather explained that the property is a part of the farm, which is owned collectively by him and his daughters. Because of this, he was permitted knowledge of what happened there. The officer explained everything. Apparently, the widow, who was quite old and infirm, used the death of my relative as an excuse to move in her chronically unemployed, drug-addicted family. Among them, her daughter, her son-in-law, her son-in-law's brother, and her nephew. Because they don't own their separate cars, and we seldom visit the widow. She stinks and is generally unlikable, so we social distanced around her before the pandemic ever even began. This transition went undetected. Shortly before my grandfather had returned home that day, the police responded to a 911 call from the widow. Her nephew is apparently involved in a gang and has violent tendencies. Some conflict arose in the household, probably related to how many drug addicts were stuffed together under a single roof for 24 hours a day. All we were told is that the nephew was becoming violent. When the police arrived, they realized there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest. He was wanted for making meth, which, interestingly, commenters on my last post blamed for the stench we had been smelling, and for assault. The nephew was hiding from the law at the widow's house. This is the reason his presence was concealed from us on the rare occasions that the widow was outside of her home and we spoke. He was removed from the home and arrested by the officers. Ever since then, there has been no strong chemical odor outside and no knocking on the window late at night. We suspect he was aware of this farm long before moving in, and it was his go-to spot for recreational drug use. The widow was around 80 years old and had her first child at approximately 13 with her first spouse, so her nephew was elderly himself and would have likely been doing drugs and playing his Pink Floyd music here 21 years ago too. We're thinking he would occasionally spend the night at the widow's house over the years and walk towards the fields near us to do drugs. It makes sense that we never heard a car accompany the knocking noises because he doesn't own a car and the house is not far since it's a part of the farm. The only incident that remains unexplained is the man who drove to our house when we weren't home and asked my grandfather about a family friend that lives hours away. I wonder if they were looking for the meth head and were told to give some sort of code to make sure he was at the right house. The name could have just been a coincidence. I had an internet incident a few months ago that suggested some stalkerish activity, but that is probably unrelated. Another good old story from South Africa. As people from there know, there are a lot of game farms, lodges, etc., especially around the area of the Kruger National Park. This incident took place on a very tranquil 4-star game farm close to the southern tip of the above-mentioned Kruger National Park. We have frequented the lodge often over the 5 years before this incident, as it was a favorite with me and my wife, then girlfriend. The lodge had a very nice central area with a pool, restaurant, etc., and then the tented chalets were spread out around, with the furthest one about 1 kilometer from the restaurant. The chalets were very private and set up in the bush, so you could not see the next one over and could only hear your neighbors if they were loud. Sadly, the lodge has fallen on hard times and has gone backwards a bit. The weekend this incident took place, only 2 of the 25 plus units were occupied for the Friday night, and we were the only ones there for the Saturday night. It made me feel a little uneasy. To make matters worse, the lodge and farm manager came by on a Saturday morning, saying he was leaving the farm for the weekend. If we needed anything, we should just go help ourselves in the restaurant fridges and leave a note. And then we could settle the bill the next week. Sure, no problem. We have the pool and jacuzzi all to ourselves. We left to go for a visit to the K&P after the manager left and stayed out most of the day. We got back around 3 p.m. and as we got out of the car, I got goosebumps. It was 35 degrees Celsius outside, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so I definitely didn't get cold. As we approached the chalet, we parked about 150 meters from it and had a little path we walked down. As we approached the chalet, I noticed big shoe prints over mine and my girlfriend's prints from this morning. That seriously put me on edge. I approached the chalet and noticed the prints turn around and walk back the way they came. Everything seemed in order at the chalet. We went for a swim and a bit of a game drive around the farm and returned around 5:30. Started to make the fire, barbecue the meat, and prepare some other food. Both I and my girlfriend seemed on edge and very quiet. We sat down to eat around 8 p.m. As we sat down, I looked at my girlfriend. She looked worried. I asked her what was wrong. She said she has a bad feeling that we have to go. I said I feel the same. We need to leave now. Not after we eat. Now. We chucked our food in the cooler, grabbed our bags, and ran to the car, jumped in, and almost raced out of there. As we went out of the gate, dropped the keys in the box and drove away. The feeling of dread slowly went away. We made the 150-kilometer, almost 100 miles drive back home in the dark and slept in our own bed. We woke up on Sunday and went about our day as normal. About 4 p.m. that afternoon, my phone rings and I see it's the number from the lodge. I answer and he frantically asks if we are okay. I say, yeah, why? He starts explaining and I get ice cold. Apparently the lodge was broken into and ransacked on Saturday night. They took everything of value and what they could not take, they destroyed. It was a group of 5 men that did it. Apparently there was evidence that they ransacked a chalet as well. Only one. The one my girlfriend and I were booked into. The one we would have been sleeping in had we not left so abruptly the previous night. So it means they were watching us. The lodge had cameras, but the chalets did not. We left just after 8 p.m., probably about 8:10 when we had everything in the car and started driving. About 8:20 when we left the farm, as it is about 2 kilometers from the lodge to the gate down a gravel road, and the cameras caught the first signs of movement at the lodge just before 8:30. At least one was visibly armed with a firearm in the footage, and a few had machetes. I shudder to think what would have happened had we been there. The nearest people would have been over 3 kilometers away in a straight line, and we were completely alone on the farm. Only a little bit of cell reception at the lodge, and none at the chalet itself. We would not have even been able to call for help. Needless to say, we did not go to lodges or isolated areas for a long time after that, and sadly, the lodge and farm went under not long after. And I saw ads that it was being sold at a bank auction. That incident has shocked us both a bit, and we vowed to always trust our instinct and intuition, and to tell each other if something feels off. We both have had that uneasy feeling since about 3 that afternoon when we came back, and the reason neither of us said anything was because we didn't want to spoil the weekend for the other. That almost cost us possibly the ultimate price. So the lesson to be learned here is trust your gut. Trust your partner's gut feeling. If something feels off, it's probably because it is. It may just as well save your life. My boyfriend at the time and I would smoke weed, listen to music, and go on really long road trips. It was fun and kind of our thing. We were around 19 years old when this happened. Johnny, my ex, suggested going to see the Devil's Tree here in New Jersey. We have this website called weirdnewjersey.com and it has a list of haunted places to go see. We decided on the Devil's Tree as our nighttime destination. So we got everything we needed and headed out for the hour and a half drive to some random town in the middle of nowhere. The ride there was fun. We were laughing, singing, and smoking. As we got to the town, we realized it was super desolate. It looked like a farming area. It was super foggy and about midnight when we arrived. We got out of the car and examined this eerie tree while reading about the urban legend behind it. The tree was terrifying. The silence was deafening. The tree was huge and had rope hanging on several branches. I started getting nervous because I wasn't familiar with the area and felt uneasy. I feel it's important to mention Johnny was not street smart. He was born to a lot of money, so his mindset was much different than mine. His dad took care of everything for him. I was much more mature and had a lot of struggle and experience in life. So we got back in the car and decided to find a spot to park so we could make out. I was a complete idiot. We were going to roll a joint and mess around. We did this often. So we found a dirt road that was desolate and parked. This area was so creepy. I locked all the doors, being the paranoid person I am. As I was rolling the joint, we heard someone attempting to open John's door, followed by aggressive banging on his window. I literally jumped out of my skin. "Put the damn light on," I screamed to my boyfriend. He did and cracked his window to see what the guy wanted. This dude was like 6'4" and was dressed in lumberjack attire. "What the heck are you doing here? Get out of the car right now. Are you going to bang her? You thought you guys were going to screw on my property?" The guy yelled manically, holding John's window. John ignorantly smiled at him and replied, "We were looking at the devil's tree and parked here to set up GPS to get home." "I'm sorry, man. I didn't know I was on your property. We will leave. We aren't getting out of the car, though." The guy leaned over to take a look at me. I started apologizing. I honestly will never forget how terrified I was. I was hoping John would roll up the window and book it the hell out of there. Before we could even pull away, 2 pickup trucks filled with other lumberjack type men pulled up. There were 4 guys sitting in the bed of the truck. I swear it was like a horror movie. One guy from the truck shouted, "Do we have a problem?" to the big guy that was still standing by John's side of the car when he said, "They were going to bang on my property." "What were you going to do with the condom?" he asked, leaning in and focusing his attention on me. "Do you realize your boyfriend is digging your grave?" I was apologizing and being as polite as possible. I started crying. I kept saying, "We weren't going to have sex. We're just trying to get out of here." I felt really scared. The guy then says, "Why are you on my property? Were you going to finish in her or just leave the condom on my property? I can kill you both and bury you and no one would find you. You're so lucky your girlfriend has some sense. Get the hell out of here before I change my mind." I started having a panic attack. "John, let's go," I screamed loudly. John hit the gas and we started driving fast down the dirt road. It was pitch black and as I said, we didn't know this area. As we were driving down the road, a lady came out of nowhere. John had his headlights on so we could see her. She had a gun and was trying to block us from leaving. I distinctly remember John saying, "I'll run her over if I have to." I was looking for a weapon in his car. He worked for his dad's construction company, so he had tools in the car. I grabbed a hammer from the back seat and John literally drove towards the lady. She was screaming shit at us. "You're not leaving," she screamed. She lunged out of the way as we drove as fast as possible right at her. I remember looking back and seeing headlights from the trucks. John took an abrupt turn, ignoring the GPS that was navigating us back home. We got on the highway as fast as we could. We were filled with nervous adrenaline. I said to John, "We almost died. You can't be an ignorant jerk to people like that. You made it worse." John was like, "Screw those guys. We are fine." When John was scared, he would smile and laugh, so I knew he was just as scared as I was. That's why the lumberjack was getting more mad because of John's attitude and responses. We drove back scared and relieved to be away from them. That guy made me feel so uncomfortable asking weird sexual questions and looking at me like he wanted to eat me. It must have been a family that lived on that property because the trucks pulled up so fast. We never went to that area again. We stopped going to weird New Jersey places. I still get chills thinking about it.